Hello, everyone, and welcome to NARUC's Grid Resilience Framework Workshop, a practical application webinar. My name is Hailea Quinn. I'm a policy advisor for NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation, and I'm delighted to have you all attend this particular webinar. This is a part of a larger technical assistance effort supported by the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Deployment Office, with the main goal of helping states meet their grid resilience implementation goals. There will be a link in the chat for more information about a quick TA opportunity that we are providing. Today's webinar is going to be led by Miles Collins from Berkeley Lab, excuse me. And just one second, I lost his bio. Miles Collins is an energy researcher in Berkeley Lab's Energy Markets and Policy Department. He conducts research on resilience planning, valuation, and benefit cost analysis for innovative utility programs. He has 17 years of experience in energy policy, strategy, and analytics, including 13 years in the utility industry. He served as the Energy Services and Utility Rates Manager at Burbank Water and Power, principal consultant at Nexent, now Resource Innovations, and manager of customer service business planning at Southern California Edison. He holds a PhD in policy analysis from the Rand Graduate School, a Master of Public Policy from UCLA, and a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Engineering from Northwestern University. Thank you, Dr. Collins, for joining us today, and we will be really excited to hear your take on the grid resilience framework and how you were able to apply it and your work and some of your upcoming work this year. And on to you.
Thanks so much, Hailea. It's a pleasure to be speaking with everyone today. If you can go to the next slide for me. Thank you. So I'm going to give a brief overview of NARUC's resilience framework. And I'm not an author of the study, but I am a consumer as I've been looking at approaching resilience planning using the framework. After the brief overview, I'll take a look at how to apply the framework to wildfire mitigation planning. So in 2023, NARUC initiated a project to help state utility regulators identify and address resilience efforts in their jurisdictions. With funding from the U.S. Department of Energy's Grid Deployment Office, NARUC sought to better understand the needs of its members to respond to investment proposals, to enhance and to plan for resilience within their jurisdictions. So with facilitation help from E9 Insight, NARUC held meetings across the U.S. with state regulators to hear about their needs and challenges. Then, based on this information, NARUC established 3 peer learning cohorts focused on specific topics. So one was resilience metrics, second was resilience valuation methodologies, and then the third was regulatory mechanisms to support grid resilience. Now, these 3 cohorts were part of the larger DOE cohort series, Energy Security and Grid Resilience cohort, sponsored by the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, or CSER, and Grid Deployment Office in collaboration with NASIO and Pacific Northwest National Lab. So the need for a resilience framework emerged through the work of these 3 cohorts. Now, the framework's not a how-to guide for developing specific actionable grid resilience plans, but instead it helps gather valuable information for decision makers to use to generate positive outcomes and to be able to meet stakeholder needs. To be useful, it was clear that the resilience framework needed to be adaptable to a wide range of regulatory contexts and regional threats, and flexible to meet a variety of resilience applications. It serves a few purposes. So on the right there, we see it guides regulators. So it's designed to help state agencies and utility commissions identify questions they can ask when considering resilience investments and planning processes. It aids other decision makers. So apart from regulators, the framework considers other state agencies and stakeholders who are involved in or affected by grid resilience and looks for ways they can participate in resilience-related discussions and decision-making. And then it supports grid and resilience planning. So it aligns with NARUG's broader goal of providing resources that promote thoughtful decision making in emerging areas of policy and technology. Um, if you go to the next slide, please. So this diagram is from the report. It covers shows the 6 components of the framework, and I'll be touching on each of these in light detail up front, and then in more detail through the application of wildfire resilience planning as we get farther into the presentation. But we'll start with goals and objectives in the upper left and move clockwise around framework to cover use cases, definitions, process leadership participation, design questions, and implementation. So it can be used in any order or combination, as the report notes. As regulators and state energy offices gather more experience in reviewing resilience proposals and conducting resilience planning, they may choose to use the framework in a more linear fashion. Next slide, please. So I'll walk through each of these briefly to give an overview. So the cohort participants, the 3 cohorts that I noted, noted that state regulators and energy offices may have been reviewing resilience proposals in some cases in a vacuum, either due to time constraints or lacking appropriate context for the proposals. They recognize that having a set of goals and objectives is an important piece of their process that may have been lacking or not perhaps adequately expressed prior to making decisions. So as a result, success was more difficult to recognize and measurements of progress were difficult to contextualize because there were few to no points of reference for progress or success or failure. So to help decision makers address grid resilience, it may be helpful to clarify and agree on the ultimate vision for a resilient grid in the state, which this framework characterizes as the resilience goal, as well as milestones on the journey to that future, which in this framework are considered the objectives. So goals are high level and objectives are more specific. Next slide. So the cohort participants also noted that the inclusion of use cases and example scenarios in this framework can help them apply these concepts to their jurisdictions and specific circumstances. A few examples of use case areas are here on the slide. So we have policy implementation, long-term planning, grants for community solutions, investments, and programs that are focused on customer-oriented solutions. So by looking at different possible scenarios, stakeholders can apply the framework to specific contexts and outline potential needs and pathways to reach the relevant goals or decisions. Next slide. The process of developing resilience programs or conducting planning for resilience, it benefits from establishing a set of shared definitions for resilience terminology early on in the process. The system's changing, the way we use it's changing, and there's a need to educate new stakeholder groups and keep people up to speed on a common set of terms and definitions. In this framework, the report provides some definitions as starting points for discussion. I'll touch on this one here for resilience, which is defined as the ability to prepare for threats and hazards, adapt to changing conditions, and withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. I'll just note within this definition, there's 4 verbs there. There's prepare, adapt, withstand, and recover, and we'll touch on those a bit in future slides. Next slide. And a key feature of the regulatory development is the nature of the process itself. So roles and responsibilities with changing risks, new communities leveraging the grid and new resources being added. It's important to understand who's doing what the roles and responsibilities are of the different entities that are involved. When a resilience event or an outage occurs, there may be multiple state and local authorities that play a role in providing services for the community. And state policies may identify a specific agency as the lead agency on certain topics. The importance of process leadership And participation is also applicable within a PUC. So identifying which division should lead a proceeding, which staff members should be consulted, can ensure that the process being implemented by the commission includes the right internal voices that have roles to play in the resilience discussion. And then finally, the process itself may warrant consideration. So commissions conduct different types of proceedings. A commission could decide to address resilience in a focused open proceeding or a technical session. They could address it in a separate proceeding or consider it in a broader proceeding. So for example, distribution system planning. Next slide. Policy and program development can be organized as a set of design questions that leaders and stakeholders work to answer together. Articulating these questions can help guide the process and generate outcomes that support the agreed upon goals and objectives. And this also helps define the scope for any process or proceeding and guide the development of an appropriate record if necessary. It's the added benefit of ensuring that the effort can stay focused on the goals and objectives. Next slide. And for implementation, finally, this component addresses decisions and guidance that a decision maker may consider when carrying out resilience-related regulatory changes and programs. So it could include developing timelines for meeting goals and objectives, using alternative options for reviewing and determining cost effectiveness, or scheduling future reviews of resilience investments. So regardless of how implementation proceeds, there should always be a clear pathway for the ongoing review of investments, metrics, and programs so that relevant goals and objectives are being met. I mentioned earlier the framework is designed so that you can go from one component to the other. You don't necessarily have to go in order, but that being said, implementation generally comes after all or at least some of the actions that we described on the previous 5 slides. Next slide. So I'm going to shift now and look at applying the resilience framework to the issue of wildfire mitigation planning as an example. So throughout here, I've brought up some applications that the cohorts addressed, which were the resilience metrics, valuation, and mechanisms. And I'm leveraging the insights that they provided in the report. And I'll also be bringing up here's some resources for applying that framework to planning for wildfires and then also for other threats as well. Next slide. So starting off at the goals and objectives, and specifically goals. So what are the desired outcomes? We're looking at a broader level than the objectives, and we're looking to identify those broader outcomes that are aligned with policies, laws, and statutes. They can address a range of outcomes, and then they can extend beyond operation of the electric system. So you could be looking into the community and providing critical public safety services. The graphic there in the bottom left is from the California Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety. So throughout the presentation, I'll be leaning on examples from utilities and from commissions and in particular California for some of these. That's guidance on what should be included in the wildfire mitigation plans, and it's guidance that the Office of Energy Safety puts out for guiding the IOU's the wildfire mitigation plan. So you see there, it says that the corporation must summarize the primary goal, plan objectives, and framework for the development of the base wildfire mitigation plan for the 3-year cycle. So I did go through and I picked out a couple higher level goals that I thought were illustrative. Southern California Edison's wildfire mitigation plan was just filed not very long ago. I think it was last week for the next 3-year cycle. They identify their primary goal as to reduce the risk of wildfires associated with utility equipment and to reduce the scope, scale, and frequency and impacts of public safety power shutoffs. Looking outside of the realm of wildfire mitigation planning, There's an example from Con Edison where they're looking to increase resilience from extreme events, decrease customer outages and disruptions, and reduce restoration costs. So these are again, the broader level goals that can be supported by objectives. Next slide, please. If we're looking to align with policies, laws, and statutes, this slide shows the result of some work we had done on resilience planning requirements for regulated utilities. So right as of now, this map shows the different states that have state requirements that have been identified and then plans filed in green. So you see there the four largest states, saying California, Texas, Florida, and New York, all have state requirements for resilience for utilities to file resilience plans, which accounts for a third of the population of the U.S. Between May 2022 and June 2024, and more than 30 regulated utilities that filed resilience plans under the requirements across the country. And so within that work that's cited there down on the left, a good resource for actually being able to go in and it has links to the different state requirements here, which can help on alignment of setting goals. And I'll note too, that these severe weather events that we see are common catalysts for legislative or regulatory action on resilience planning requirements. So an example, in California in 2018, there was a catastrophic wildfire season, and the state legislature afterwards passed Senate Bill 901, and that mandated that the utilities submit wildfire mitigation plans. In subsequent years, the CPUC, the Public Utility Commission, and the Office of Energy Safety that I had mentioned before built out more specific requirements for the plans and then the associated reporting requirements. And there's a similar situation in Florida. 2019, they passed SB 796 in response to catastrophic hurricane season the previous 2 years, and the utilities there filed storm protection plans now. So the states can require that resilience plans address a range of hazards, or they may focus on specific extreme weather events like storms and wildfires. Next slide. So objectives, this is the next level down from goals, and these are more actionable items that are more specific. And again, I put a few examples here from the same Southern California Edison Wildfire Mitigation Plan. There's 8 objectives that align with the overarching goal they've set out. Here's 3 of them here. You can see that if I look at the first one, it talks about continuing programmatic development of covered conductor and targeted undergrounding of distribution lines. Toward the end, it talks about reducing the potential frequency and duration of public safety power shutoff events, or PSPS. These are, if we look ahead towards how we're actually going to measure progress toward the objectives, these objectives contain sort of a description of the level of resilience in terms of, oh, sorry about that, my dog, covered conductor, and then also undergrounding. So those aren't so much outcomes, but are more descriptions of the level of resilience, and that aligns with what we call attribute metrics. So they contribute to the resilience of the system or of a community, but they don't necessarily describe what the outcome is. So by tracking these, though, you can connect the performance of the infrastructure with the characteristics inherent in those attribute metrics. The other component of that objective are what we call performance metrics. So these are more outcome related. So they describe the effectiveness of resilience investments by trying to quantify the extent to how they've reduced the negative impacts of outages or of resilience events. So these we'll get into what these are, but these are things like the outages, The potential frequency and duration of PSPS events is mentioned in the objective. Next slide. So this diagram here shows what's typically called the resilience trapezoid. It's a graph that shows a common visual representation of resilience, where you have like the level of service or the level of resilience on the y-axis, and then going across is time. And you see the trapezoid is formed when you go through and you are subject to a hazard. There's power that's lost. The grid is impacted. Service level drops. It is sustained for a while at a lower level, and then power is restored, and the grid resumes its normal state. So it forms this shape of a trapezoid. There's different versions of this graph, of this figure. They're similar. This one has 3 different phases, and I put this on here so that we could illustrate. This gives a good illustration of the attribute metrics I had mentioned. As you go left to right across the x-axis through the event, you cover the different components of that resilience definition, which would be the anticipation of the event, being able to withstand the impact of the hazard, adapting to the hazard, and then recovering from it. Next slide. And so this is a list of attribute metrics that align with those resilience phases. And again, these metrics can be used. They describe the condition of the grid, the level of resilience. So on the anticipation side, we'd focus on situational awareness, whether there's a high fire threat, how well is the utility able to, the system able to anticipate the upcoming threat. And then withstand, this gets into hardening, the conditions of the assets, the ratings of the assets. Adapt is looking at how well the community and the grid, so the whole system can respond to the resilience event and be able to minimize its impacts. So this could be automation and topology, so the grid finding a networked grid being able to have more ties and being less susceptible to vegetation falling on a line somewhere. You could have emergency backup power. Then there's these items, there are social indicators and community resilience, which get at the broader idea of the community resilience. And finally, the recovery metrics, which get into the accessibility of the system and the grid, and power restoration. Next slide. So again, thinking outside of the grid itself and looking at the broader community, this slide just shows a couple examples of measuring community resilience. One's from Southern California Edison, and the other's Pacific Gas and Electric. So Southern California Edison developed their own community resilience metric, which is a combination of a number of different indicators of sensitivity, like health risks, housing quality, and then they have a number related to specifically to adaptive capacity, or how well the community can adapt to, let's say, a power outage. The figure on the right shows the scores that they have based on the geography within their service territory. And Pacific Gas and Electric uses what's called the baseline resilience indicator for communities, which is a publicly available index. And they've gone through and used that to represent the ability of the community to adapt and how resilient the community is. So a few different ways of looking at that component of resilience. Next slide. Now I'll get into the performance metrics. So we'll start with ones tied to reliability. And I'll go over these just briefly, but the reliability indices are defined by IEEE, and they were first developed in 1998. They're normally calculated and reported annually, which is in contrast to resilience metrics, which tend to be more focused on specific events. So we have the bigger indices up top: SAIDI, SAFE, CAIDI. These are system averages where we're looking at frequency, duration of interruptions. M is MAFE, that represents outages that are less than 5 minutes or momentary outages. And then you get the indices that are toward the bottom there. They begin with the letter C. So this looks a little bit more specifically at the customers, and it gets at information that's not apparent when you're only examining averages, like the portion of customers experiencing multiple interruptions, or the portion of customers experiencing long interruption durations. So semi is the multiple, CMM, multiple momentaries. The third one there, SEMSME, right? We have a combination of momentary and sustained, and then down toward the bottom, that's the experiencing long interruption durations of different times. Next slide. If we look at performance metrics that have been a bit more tailored to resilience, but also, these are the ones that we see in the utility resilience plans. They can cover a number of different areas here. So we could have, on the left there, we have electric service, restoration, and asset damage or failure. So this slide gives a number of different examples from each. So on the electric service side, we could look at customer interruptions, customer minutes interrupted, which are the building blocks of the metrics that I covered on the reliability slide, and also the targeted reliability indices. So we do see in the plans, there's an attempt to use what has traditionally been like a reliability index, but using it at a circuit level for very specific types of threats, or under specific weather conditions. The restoration metrics get at the relationship between how many customers are restored and over what amount of time. So if you're looking at the metrics that represent time, it could be from the beginning of the event to when a certain percentage are restored, or from the peak of the event to when you have like 95% restoration. And then you have the percentage metrics, which are the inverse of those. So after a given time, what percent of customers have been restored? And then asset damage or failure. So how well did the assets perform during the events? Next slide. Performance metrics on the monetary impact side. So there's three categories here. There's the cost to the utility. So, earlier we had seen that Con Ed goal of reducing restoration costs. So you can measure that, and how much, whether it's O&M or capital restoration costs, what's the cost to the utility to restore power and to repair the grid. There's customer interruption costs. So these are those incurred by customers experiencing a power interruption. Berkeley Lab has a tool called the ICE calculator, which is used by a number of utilities to aggregate these customer interruption cost studies, and be able to provide for a given increase or decrease, or for outages that are avoided from grid investments, what's the benefit to there's the avoided customer interruption costs, and there's a few metrics there associated with that. And then economy-wide impacts. So these are looking at for widespread long duration interruptions, which last more than 24 hours. These are different than just being able to go and survey customers. So Berkeley Lab for this has a prototype tool that combines these surveys with macroeconomic modeling, and you can get models of the economy that are calibrated to the results of the customer surveys, where you're looking at these metrics here, like gross output, gross regional domestic product, and then change in household consumption. So some broader economic metrics. Next slide. And I list here some additional resources for looking at goals, objectives, and metrics. So the reports that are contained up there. have the links to the state requirements, and they have the link to distribution planning requirements, as well as some information on what metrics and data are in these utility resilience plans, and then also links to the two tools I mentioned on valuing reliability and resilience improvements. Next slide. A couple more additional resources. So there is the one on the left is a Berkeley Lab tool for looking at, again, the state distribution plan requirements. It's a user interface and a map maker, and there's a database there that's available on being able to look specifically at different requirements and proceedings. And on the right, I'll just mention that EPRI, after 3 years of work, is releasing now its climate ready power framework. So it has a lot of good information in there on an integrated approach to look at physical climate risk. And in this particular case, this report is the report on metrics that I had been taking a look at and noticing a shout out within it to NARUC's resilience framework down there in the bottom right. Next slide. So use cases. So leveraging some of the work that the cohorts did. Just to give an example of what use cases could be. For metrics, they took a look at use cases related to metrics for specific neighborhoods or regions to be able to measure outcomes granularly. And the valuation cohort, they were looking at how do you need a method of calculating value in order to make decisions, and they were applying it to like a grant application program. You could also apply it to project results. So down at the bottom, there's a couple use cases for wildfire mitigation using that categories I provided earlier. And I won't list them here, but they're here on the slide, and I'll move to the next slide. So definitions are key, and you see them in a lot of the resilience plans, and they're an important part of being able to keep folks up to speed and understand, because there are a lot of terms that are differently used throughout the country. These are the ones I'll touch on each of these right now, these concepts and terms, and give a little bit more detail. Next slide. The critical facilities and vulnerable populations are two of them. So critical facilities are essential for the health and well-being of the community, and they would be things like hospitals, fire stations, water treatment facilities. You have another level of essential facilities, which is a secondary category, and it's looking at facilities that are intended to remain operational if there was a multi-day outage. So not critical, but it's things like gas stations and grocery stores, pharmacies. And then for vulnerable populations, different states will identify different subpopulations that have less access, less support systems, disabilities, and other needs where they could be more adversely impacted by a power outage, in particular a longer one. Next slide. So the next two slides, this slide provides a more detailed description of critical facilities and infrastructure for the CPUC. And I'm not going to review this all in detail, but this is here just to illustrate that there are a couple different decisions that were involved in getting this description, which are listed at the bottom, but they have a pretty detailed way of identifying exactly what is considered critical facilities and infrastructure. And next slide. And for the wildfire mitigation plans in California, there's the vulnerable populations item. This is one of the designations that they use, which is the access and functional needs population. And there's a definition here, and it is some of the factors that I had listed in describing as folks that have access issues are ones that need special consideration if there's going to be a public safety power shutoff event. And so it's good to know where those customers are. and be able to keep their needs in mind. On the right there is just a graphic showing within Southern California Edison Service Territory that they have the heat map of where those customers are. Next slide. Event severity level. So that's another definition that's key. There's different ways of categorizing event severity. So there's the traditional blue sky, gray sky, black sky, where you're looking at normal conditions versus conditions that pose reliability concerns. And then for black sky, these are the severe catastrophic events. There's a designation of major event day. So this comes into play for the reliability indices in that these major event days are statistically determined based on 5 years of reliability history for a utility. And it's a way of being able to take out the very large impactful days, those outlier days from outage data so that you can compare reliability performance. Major event days often, but not always, overlap with what would be considered a resilience event. And that graph on the right just shows what daily SAIDI data would look like, where you have like most of it clustered toward a very low value, but then you have those days with resilience events that indicate there's fewer and fewer of them, but that tail stretches out to the right. And so for classifying a major event day, you would take the log of those values, you'd find the threshold, and then you'd be able to determine which days to exclude from outage data for reliability purposes, or maybe to look more closely at for resilience purposes. This translates, so you would expect, based on the statistical work, that it would be about 2.3 MEDs per year on average. Next slide. I'll touch on these two items. So major storms and wind warnings. There's different ways of categorizing major storms, whether it's based on the percentage of customers who are out for a certain number of hours. Different states have those designations. Wind is an important one too. So it could be high wind warning or red flag warning. These are National Weather Service issuances, and these are important for wildfire planning as well. Next slide. Indicators of risk, important for wildfire planning, the high fire threat district. So what is that? You were looking at areas designated in the example for California. The PUC designates it as having an elevated wildfire risk. Utilities will often look more closely at their own modeling as well and have a separate designation that they also include, like a high fire risk area. But these are areas where utility needs to take additional action to mitigate wildfire risk. And then a good resource too, FEMA's National Risk Index. They have a website where it's linked here, and you can make maps for different hazards across the country. The two for wildfire risk and ice storm risk are shown here on this slide. They have a number of other ones, and then they have the information and data behind those calculations that's available as well. Next slide. On the process, leadership, and participation component, in looking at wildfire, again, I'll leverage within the framework report, the cohorts looked at this question for their applications. The focus was on which other agencies should be involved in the process. So the resilience metrics cohorts laid it out as a set of guiding questions that would be helpful for figuring that out, which are listed here. And on the valuation cohort, they're thinking in the context of a resilience grant program. So the valuation, whatever valuation methodology is determined, may be used in other cases in the state. So needing to have other agencies on board that could be affected by a valuation formula or method is important. And some of those agencies that they mentioned are listed on the slide as well. Next slide. And some resources. There's links to a few resources here related to process participation. So there's the Native Desk Reference Manual. And down toward the bottom, there's a recent webinar that Berkeley Lab did on stakeholder engagement and the different components of that. Next slide. Moving to the design question component. So as I mentioned, it can be organized, the policy and program development can be organized as a set of design questions. Some of the topics that are covered in these questions that are raised would be: what threats or hazards are we addressing? How prescriptive will guidance be? How will resilience planning integrate with other planning processes and proceedings? And then there's a number of questions here that the regulatory mechanisms cohort raised about what mechanisms will be used in the design of the program or of the process. I'll touch on a few more resources and details for these. If you go to the next slide. Prescriptiveness of state requirements. So this is a table from our look at the different state requirements for resilience plans. It's organized by each row is a different state, and then it's organized in groups of rows by the types of hazards that are addressed. So toward the top, it's an ensemble of hazards, and then it gets to severe storms and wildfire. The different colored circles indicate how prescriptive or flexible the guidance is related to each of the factors listed in the columns. So whether it's on vulnerability assessment, if something is more prescriptive, so the darker red, it's the extent to which the guidance defines requirements for analysis frameworks and performance metrics. For the lighter orange ones, it's less prescriptive, it's more higher level. And then for the blue, there's more flexibility on what should be in the plans and what shouldn't. So again, there's links here and there's examples in that report about how the guidance is worded. Next slide. How are we going to prioritize the different mitigation components and assess them? So this slide contains a few different methods with a few different families of methods, I should say, that we see in the plans about how to, and in the requirements about how to select and prioritize investments. So it includes benefit cost analysis, which looks at present value of monetized benefits and costs. You can look at that ratio for prioritization. There's the risk-based analyses, which can estimate cost effectiveness using risk reduction benefits and can rank it based on a risk spend efficiency. And then there's multi-criteria assessment, which is useful when there's certain benefits that are difficult to quantify and can use composite indices of scores and weighting for each criteria. Next slide. And then the design question of integrating resilience planning into other parts of the planning processes. This is a diagram, and there's a link here to Berkeley Lab's integrated distribution system planning. So again, it's a systematic approach to look at distribution system planning to satisfy customer service expectations, and then the different objectives that the state or the utility might have, and then for grid needs and design planning. So it looks at a number of different criteria and helps to reach that balance. In each of these boxes here on the slide, there's a click in to get more information and details on the processes behind them and the analyses. Next slide. I'll just touch on this. This is in the report, but the regulatory mechanisms cohort put together a taxonomy of mechanisms as part of the work that they did, which is in the appendix of the report. So you can look at the different mechanisms that you could use in the design, like mandates, incentives, and market structure. And it gives a description and examples of each one. Next slide. Finally, on the implementation side, so this is guidance for decisions or guidance for decision makers to look at when they're carrying out the regulatory changes in programs. So again, there's a set of design questions here, or sorry, implementation questions for guiding that process and the different things that need to be considered, like reporting, data collection, and further analyses that might be needed. So if you go to the next slide, This just shows an example from the Office of Energy Safety in California of how granular some of that data reporting can be. So this is the template for reporting on wildfire metrics, and it's broken up by, you can see the high fire threat tier, um, the line type, the different, what caused the outage, and what the risk driver is, and the geography is broken up in there as well. So it can get very detailed in order to get that right level of reporting. So it's important to determine, what do you have the capacity to be able to consume, and what's going to be helpful for the future and assessing the program. Next slide. This revisits the objective slide from earlier, where we looked at Southern California Edison's wildfire mitigation plan objectives, and this adds a column there on the right where there's a set of metrics that align with those objectives, that reflect the different outcomes that you could use to tie the two together, and you could measure progress towards those objectives. So I thought it was a nice way of looking at that alignment, and being able to make the connection between goals, objectives, and metrics. Next slide. On evaluation and prioritization, so there's a few different ways of a few different analyses that are in the plans, that are in the utility resilience plans. Ex post analysis is one I'd like to touch on. So this is being able to compare performance of the grid both before and after implementing resilience measures. In an ideal ex post analysis, you'd be able to control for various factors like weather that could impact system performance in order to isolate the impact of whatever the resilience measure is that you're implementing. That can be challenging for resilience events, but we see more and more utilities that are trying to do it, and trying to set up that experimental design process within, like, as you're beginning to design the implementation and move forward with deploying whatever technology or measure that might be. So ex ante analysis, this is backwards looking. So this is when you're trying to determine what impacts would be from implementing resilience measures moving forward. You can leverage information from your ex post analyses to predict future performance, which can be very helpful in assessing future grid investments. So the bottom right there's an example of Portland General Electric implemented safety adjusted protection settings on devices within a high fire risk zone in order to reduce ignition risk during fire season. So in order to analyze the system-wide reliability impact of it, they looked at an ex post analysis to compare SAIDI, and MAFI during the wildfire season in 2019, 2020 before implementation with that after implementation. And they found that there were slightly longer interruptions during extreme weather days, but a negligible impact on reliability indices. So again, the kinds of being able to control for certain factors as much as you can to be able to see what the impact is to metrics. Next slide. And this is I guess the penultimate slide here, but looking at considerations for using the framework, it's important to look at the environment of the state agency, utilities, and customers, so it can be adaptable, and to look at the needs of the state and what needs have been expressed by stakeholders, and then the intention too. Why is grid resilience being addressed? And this can help to adapt the framework for other types of threats and other types of scenarios. Next slide. So this has my contact information and a link to more of our publications. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up if anyone would like to email me. If you go to the next slide, I'll just put in a note here that we've been doing a set of resilience planning webinars for resilience events. We had one in March on wildfire planning. There's going to be one on June 16th. for severe storms, and we'll look at hurricanes as well. So we'll talk about some of the data metrics and analyses that are specific to those. And then what's really neat is that we'll have a panel of folks from state agencies. There'll be 4 people talking about planning processes in their states in the East, Southeast. And then we'll also have 3 utility subject matter experts that are talking about specific resilience plans and projects in their state. So love to have you attend that as well. And there's a little registration link on the slide. And thanks very much. I see a couple questions have come up in Q&A. What are some of the largest trends you all have observed of adoption from regulators? Which is this adoption for on decisions? If this is adoption on decisions, let's see, we don't cover the decisions there, but I can send Haile a link to some of the information perhaps that we see on outcomes from these from regulatory proceedings, and perhaps you can share it. Next question, any guidance on applying the framework ahead of rate cases? Would you say that this is a preparatory tool to make rate cases more informed? I'm a little lost on when this should be used or when it is optimal to use. So I think both on applying the framework, and Haile, feel free to jump in on this one too. I think I think it could be either. This is really covering. It could cover. That's a good question. It could cover the design of programs and solutions that would perhaps lead into a rate case. I think it could be after. I would probably say both here. I hadn't thought about the ideal timing for what the implementation would be, but apart from even rate cases, there could be other proceedings as well that might not relate specifically to what the rate case is, but where these resilience investments could be addressed separately from that. So how do you see the role of satellite data for resilience? We have a number of links in some of the reports there to the data sources that utilities are using to do their vulnerability assessments. So there's a whole section in the in the data metrics analyses related to vulnerability assessments and what different utilities are doing. And it goes into more detail on where they get their information on hazards, where they get their information on exposure data. So some of that is information that is publicly available and generated, and that could then be like apart from the satellite data, the downscaled climate models that utilities can use in their planning processes in order to characterize what those threats are and what the exposure of their assets are. I think there is an aspect on the anticipation side as well for those attribute metrics, like being able to anticipate what the threat is going to be and whether that's characterizing, whether it's characterizing, I guess, whether it's more on the situational awareness side, like I guess the cameras aren't necessarily satellites, but being able to see what's going on in real time versus what's the condition of the land and the environment that could then that could contribute to what would be potentially like a fire potential index, and one that could be changing and updated on a regular basis. With that, I don't see any other questions. I'll hand it off to Jeff to close out.
Thanks, Miles. Hi, Jeff Loiter here. I'm part of the team at NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation, and I want to briefly tell you a little bit about a workshop that we're running on Sunday morning of our Summer Policy Summit, which is coming up in July in Boston. I hope some of you are at least considering attending the summit, and maybe this is an extra enticement. On Sunday morning, you'll get a chance to um, really work with this framework in more detail and start applying it to a situation that's of interest and of concern to you and your jurisdiction and your agency. Our objective is that you will leave this workshop with really some tangible, at least one, hopefully it may be a few goals and objectives, which is one of the earlier sort of phases in the framework. Decide what it is you really think you want to aim for and try to accomplish towards the resilience goals and objectives. Again, that's relevant for you. It may not be wildfires. A lot of great information from Miles here on that, but if you're at another jurisdiction, you may have other resilience concerns. And so the workshop will be an opportunity to talk with some experts, including some of the authors of the framework, have some facilitated discussions with your peers. Fair warning, we're going to ask you to spend a little bit of time in some quiet individual reflection and journaling, but we're not going to grade you on that work. Don't worry. It's for you to have that tangible outcome at the end to take back and then continue working on with your peers at your agency and in your state. We know you have a lot of demands on your time. I hope that the opportunity to spend a couple of focused hours without distractions from other things is appealing for you. And I hope that it also being on Sunday morning helps get you in the mode and learning mode and mindset for the rest of the conference for the Summer Policy Summit. As a bonus, we're giving you breakfast. Breakfast will start at 8. The work and the workshop will start promptly at 9, and we hope you will consider it. If you're interested, you have to submit a separate registration. There's the link. Thank you, Jessica. Um, Please feel free to reach out to myself or to Hialeah if you have questions about this. And we hope you'll consider it, and we look forward to seeing you in July in Boston. Any last words, Hialeah?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. On behalf of NARUC, the Grid Deployment Office, and LBNL, we are excited that you were able to join us today. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your participation in today's webinar. As you mentioned, this is a larger part of a technical assistance series that we are doing. And we hope that you were able to gain some valuable knowledge and tips to apply the framework in your work. And we hope to see you in July. This recording will be posted on NARUC's website along with the slides that are approved for external distribution. So thank you again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.